right, now joined by Jacobin editor and publisher Bhaskar Sunkara and Age of Napoleon host and Trillburn on Twitter, Everett Rummage. I was kind of thinking about starting this with the Spike Lee Bitcoin commercial because he's talking about digital rebellion, but
I didn't even see that.
Would be too dark. You haven't seen it?
Know it was a thing. No, I've been locked doing accounting work all day, so I completely missed that.
Well, okay, in that case, we'll do it anyway.
Jeez.
So here we go.
Currency is not current. Old money, as rich as it looks, is flat out broke. Don't believe me? I got the receipts. We call it green, but it's only white. Where's the women, the black folks, and the people of color? Native Americans got a nickel. A nickel!
So there you go. Fiat currency. It's bad. It systematically oppresses. It's just for white men. But Bitcoin is exciting. It's multiracial. It lifts us up.
My first impression, I'm really struck by a couple of years ago. Some viewers might remember this. The payday loan industry went on a big PR blitz, and it was very much in the same vein as this. You know, that we serve communities that are underserved by the big banks. We're the insurgents. You know, we're the kind of the hip young way to bank, and and pay 40% interest or whatever. So it's interesting that we seem to be recycling that talking point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it really is like the way that the fact that they use, like, I think my favorite detail about it is the use of systematic in the beginning. That it systematically oppresses, whereas the new money lifts us up, because that seems like one of the most distinctive features of the post 2020 landscape, that everything is either structural or systematic.
So that video was so bad it broke my entire internet. It just completely, there's no internet in my entire building. I'm getting texts from my neighbors. It was just the video. I love that they had do your own research, because that's what every single conspiracy theorist I've ever met has told me about it. Hey, do your own research. Do your own research. And it fits the level of just absolute crank insanity that is most crypto stuff. All crypto stuff, unless you're trying to do something illegal. Like if you're doing illegal gambling, if you're trying to evade U.S. sanctions, there's a few legitimate reasons for cryptocurrency, and that's basically it.
Yeah, people always say it's useless. I say, no, it's not. Criminals get so much use out of it. Terrorists get so much use out of it. I mean, there is an inherent utility to it. It's just not for people who are not, breaking the law.
Right.
Some laws are meant to be broken.
True.
I dabbled in crypto one time, and that was because this little Irishman, Conor McGregor, just thought that he could take on Floyd Mayweather. And I was like, this is the surest bet of all time. How does one illegal gamble? I typed that into my browser. How do you illegally gamble? And apparently doing it through crypto. I might pass the statute or whatever. Anyway, it was a sure bet. It was facilitated by, I don't even think it was Bitcoin. I think it was LTE or something, Litecoin. Anyway.
Yeah.
Litecoin, right? That's the new Elon Musk backed Zoomer craze. Anyway.
Yeah, I can actually imagine that as the Spike Lee commercial. Bitcoin is out, Litecoin is in. Well, it is Bastille Day. So on the subject of breaking the law, and also on the subject of rebellions, possibly more meaningful ones than the digital rebellion that Spike Lee is talking about. I guess the jury is out on that. So, I mean, I guess one way into this, is that this. So Jacobin obviously is called Jacobin. Because of the French and Haitian revolutions, I'll preempt you, since I know you're gonna want to bring this in very quickly. The Jacobin runs their 789 special Bastille Day subscriptions if you subscribe today. So we'll start. Maybe we could talk just a little bit about about Bastille Day and about the French Revolution, and then about the kind of wider significance of that for emancipatory politics. Like why you'd start a socialist magazine in the 21st century and call it Jacobin. But Everett, since you actually do a history podcast, you're up to. I'm a couple episodes behind, but when I was last listening, you're talking about the Haitian Revolution at that point, and I certainly heard the stuff we were covering, Bastille Day and the early stages of the French Revolution. So you want to start us off with the event itself?
Sure. Well, there's lots of places you could start the story, but basically on this day in 1789. France was involved in this financial / political crisis. Basically, the king, whose personal finances, of course, were synonymous with the state, the king had run out of credit. And so he needed money, and these bankers came to him and they said, we are willing to offer you this very generous loan package if you recall the old Estates General, which was a kind of proto-parliament. And the king had no choice but to agree. And over time, this Estates General kind of, through a series of crises and political back and forth, evolved into sort of an alternate center of power within France that was pro-reform and opposed to the king. And kind of no one knew what direction things would take, if the king and his court would be able to reassert authority, or if this new thing, the Estates General, would somehow push forward and bring the country into a new political age. Then the king dismissed his finance minister. And in Paris, which is where a lot of the supporters of the Estates General, and who were radicals, lived, this news spread. And as the news spread, the finance minister was very popular, and he was seen as a man of the people. And so as this terrible news spread that he was fired, it kind of got embellished and exaggerated. And before you know it, people are talking about, this is the beginning of the end. The king is going to call down troops into Paris. He's going to dissolve the assembly. Unless we do something, we've lost. It's all over. And so the crowds that are out in the streets discussing this news kind of start to get this momentum of something needs to be done. We need to do something. And before you know it, it's turned into more of a sort of riot protest situation. The government loses control over the city. They call out the army to put down the rebellion, but the soldiers join the mob, and the king doesn't know what to do. And so for over a day, the city is controlled by these mobs. They don't really know what to do. They know, though, that if it does come down to arms with the king, they're going to need ammunition and weapons. And they know that the ammunition and weapons are stored at the Bastille. The Bastille was kind of like the Guantanamo Bay of this era. It was seen as this kind of symbol of tyranny and the overreach of the monarchy and the abuses of the monarchy. And so it's got this symbolic significance, and it's where the gunpowder is. So the Bastille is surrounded. The commander actually has no interest in throwing down with this mob. He's got a very small garrison. They're not prepared for this. They have no food, no water. And he tries to negotiate with them, but, he's a soldier. He's not going to give up his position to a bunch of, lawless civilians. So they're at this impasse. Shots are fired. It turns into kind of a battle. Remember, there's all these soldiers in the crowd who've deserted to join the revolutionaries. And so they fight almost like a conventional battle against the Bastille garrison. Eventually, the Bastille garrison realizes that there's kind of nothing they can do. And then it's over, and they surrender. They let in the crowd. The commander, unfortunately, is torn limb from limb and killed, even though he did give up the fortification eventually. And the crowd gets in there and realizes there's just not much in the Bastille. It's more of a symbol than a real important installation for the regime. There's about 12 people imprisoned in there. Sources differ. And they're mostly actually counterfeiters, not political prisoners. And there's no, scary torture devices, which were very popular in the political pamphlets. It's just kind of a semi-deserted place that's used for these kind of, whatever odds and ends the royal government needs it to be used for. The crowd kind of mills around for a while, and they get their weapons, but there's not many there. And that's kind of it. It was kind of an anticlimax, really, when you look at it up close. The real importance, of course, is that people had taken this popular action against the government, and they'd crossed that threshold of actually bearing arms against the king and against the government. And so that's, the symbolic significance is much, much beyond any of the practical consequences.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So that's, this becomes very quickly, right? Has this massive symbolic significance. Like the next year, they're already doing a big commemoration of the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille.
Yeah, actually, that day, the anniversary, the following year is, I think, actually probably more than anything else, the reason it's still considered France's national holiday is because by that point, the king had been forced to accept reforms, had become a constitutional monarch, and they threw this big party kind of to say, hey, what a year it's been. Things started with this terrible day at the Bastille. Now things are looking up. The king and the court have agreed with the revolutionaries. There's national unity again for the first time since the crisis began. People of Paris built this really remarkable kind of outdoor stadium structure, mostly just with their hands, with shovels and picks. And they had this big outdoor festival with, all the people of Paris there. People came in from all over France. The king swore an oath to the Constitution. General Lafayette, who was the leader of the National Guard, also, swore an oath of office and kind of put himself at the center of attention. And it was this very optimistic day that was supposed to be the culmination of this process. Huge parties lasted 3 days after. And then, of course, that turned out to be just kind of the last day of calm before the revolution, really descended into violence. But, it was in people's memories through all those bad years of the 1790s as this, this festival of national unity, the Feast of the Federation, they called it. And, I think in a certain sense, all of the subsequent Bastille Day celebrations have been trying to get back to that moment, even though, we now know from subsequent history that was a false sense of unity.
So, this is, again, Jacobin is called Jacobin, is the Bastille Day, subscription drive. Normally there'd be an actual physical party. And
we had a big one a few years ago. Actually, we had a party that attracted so many people that some unfortunate poor young people joined the line thinking this was just some cool Brooklyn party, and were probably really disappointed when they got inside and it was like Chapo in conversation with Jacobin. They were just like, what the hell? I remember people asking me why there wasn't a full bar, why there was just like one keg of like terrible free donated beer we got. But actually, Everett's account of the storm in the Bastille, I actually didn't really know. I thought this was some sort of huge climactic event. And it kind of reminds me of the mythology that was built around the storming of the Winter Palace. Like, obviously, the Russian Revolution was this really important world historic event. But the actual storming of the Winter Palace was like very anticlimactic. There was no resistance whatsoever. Like, there was no like they definitely ransacked the palace and got drunk off the Tsar's booze and whatever else. So there was some of that, festival around it. But when they reenacted it year after year to create drama and to symbolize what the whole arc of the revolution was from 1915 to 1905 to really the end of the Civil War, they, added conflict, and they depicted the whites as like defending the Winter Palace to the very last man, or whatever else. So I imagine the Bastille is was kind of like that.
I love the image of the storming of the Winter Palace. To me, is always from the Eisenstein film.
Mm-hmm.
The guy puts his boot on the symbol of the Tsar in the gate so he can get over the gate. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It's so. I mean, in reality, they came in a side door, and there was no one there. But that image is so good that it's almost better than the reality.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's like the. Obviously Eisenstein is really good at that. Like the battleship Potemkin, the scene like leading up. Spoiler for anybody on the battleship Potemkin. The scene leading up to the sailors, mutinying and turning the guns on the officers. I remember there's like a priest who's like. Has a big crucifix that he's sort of using like a hammer to sort of do this in his hand, and it's like just such a beautiful little visual detail. But yeah, so I think I was kind of thinking about the symbolic significance of this, and like. Obviously in the Jacobin case, that's it's partially, because of the French Revolution, but also partially the Haitian Revolution. Obviously, the C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins, and like the cover artwork there is a big influence on the iconography of Jacobin Magazine. But of course, that's also, I remember like Slavoj Žižek saying that he thought that ironically, of course, because Napoleon tried to crush it later, but that the Haitian Revolution is sort of what made the French Revolution worth it in a way. Like that was the sort of full flowering of the promise of human freedom there.
Yeah, I think they both had the reason why I think so many generations of socialists looked to the example of the French Revolution was just because it was a early example of mass politics actually seizing the levers of state power and transforming society from top to bottom. So obviously there was lots of periods of like peasant revolts and other kind of revolts from below for many centuries. But here was a revolt that carried out a complete transformation of a society from top to bottom. Here was a revolt that took a whole new radical idea of liberty, of equality, of fraternity, that took Republican principles that forcefully pushed aside the political remnants of feudalism. I'm a kind of fairly doctrinaire Marxist in my view of like the transition from feudalism to capitalism. So I don't think capitalism came about because of a bourgeois revolution, but I do think that the significance of the mass politics is what captured people's imaginations, and the fact that all these vestiges of oppression that had existed for centuries could just be basically wiped away between 1789 and 1790, 93. And then obviously also the arc of what happened after the counter-revolution, Thermidor, then Bonapartism, I think reminds us of a lot of similar arcs in revolutionary periods. Obviously, Trotsky famously drew on Bonapartism and drew upon what happened during this period of counter-revolution in his analysis of what happened to the Russian Revolution. Lenin, before the Russian Revolution, looked more so than a lot of other of his contemporaries to the example of the Jacobins and the Jacobin spirit. And obviously, Lenin, you don't really associate with the more Republican traditions of like French socialism that were developing in the late 19th century. But like them, he drew a lot, I think, on the at least the spirit of what the Jacobin revolt, meant. So for us, it was really it's maybe in a very rigid way. I think when you're on the socialist left, you are taught like in some order the most important revolutions are the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, right? And in a sense, because the French Revolution comes first, you ascribe this kind of importance to it. And for Jacobin, to be perfectly honest, I've given people tons of different explanation about why they named it Jacobin. Like, I don't even really remember.
It's like
but it's safer. It was
the
safer
Dark
than
Knight,
naming
where
it
every time Heath
Bolshevik, I'm
Ledger
sure.
explains the stars, it's different.
Yeah, we were going back to like the I think earlier revolution, pre-socialist revolution that was more vague in people's mind, but still symbolized upturning, and also the fact that people who have been dormant, it seems, quote unquote, scare quotes, dormant for centuries, can arise and can become, actors in history, can have that agency to get rid of oppression that we thought was so natural. And I think today, so much of the oppression, the hierarchy around the world that we think of as so natural, one day maybe it won't be the same sort of rapid 4 years of rupture like the French Revolution, but I think it will be done away with, and we will look at this as a really great moment that propelled forward human society.
Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. I mean, I think that there's another issue, I mean, I guess, with the French Revolution and then socialism, right, which is that there are multiple competing traditions within the socialist movement about how to think about that relationship. And like, even I think in like Marx, I think Marx is a little all over the place on this, but like, I think, but there is, so there are competing views, but there is like one view according to which the way to think about the relationship between those bourgeois revolutions of the 18th century and early 19th century and transformation to socialism happened in the 20th or 21st century is that the latter fulfills the promises made by the former, right? That you have these.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree with that as socialists, that basically the French Revolution set, and the Enlightenment more broadly, in its radical form at least, set out these principles of liberty, of equality, of solidarity that capitalism has been unable to fulfill. Capitalism both makes possible through its abundance and through bringing us together in these new, larger places of work and whatever else, but ultimately does not fulfill. And I think we could all basically agree with that. I mean, I think where there's debates among socialists is whether capitalist development of the rise of the bourgeoisie actually needed this new sort of political order, or whether it was going to come to birth in a different way, because you already had the seeds of capitalism developing very rapidly out of the English countryside and in the Netherlands and other places. And I think European history looks a lot different because of the French Revolution, of course. It speeds things up dramatically. I think even Napoleon himself, his influence on Europe and the modernization of European bureaucracies and whatever else are undeniable. I'm less certain on just out of ignorance, I'm less certain on like the arc of capitalism as a whole, whether it looks a lot different with or without the French Revolution. French capitalism certainly does look different. I think you probably have some residual power of like certain smallholders, and I don't know. I'm sure French capitalism was very shaped by the French revolution. But I think that's the kind of debate between the Neil Davidsons of the world, who would use the word bourgeois revolution, and the Ellen Wood and Bob Brenner and people like that, who have a different view about the transition from feudalism to capitalism. But I don't think that that latter group of people downplay it as a significant political event.
Yeah, well, I mean, before throwing to Everett, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that if nothing else, the like certainly, I mean, we talked a little bit about the rhetoric and the symbolism, but I mean, I think also just the legal changes that are brought about by the French Revolution, which end up being very influential, even in places that weren't, conquered by Napoleon or whatever, are certainly significant in the emergence of capitalism as we know. I mean, like, I think even the idea of like a well understood distinction between even to have a conversation about like things being privatized or things being public property, that kind of distinction, that there's stuff that's the property of the public, at large, as opposed to like the property of the king or something, like, I'm sure I'm simplifying a little bit here, but I mean, like I think a lot of that has to do with legal changes brought about by the French Revolution.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That distinction between public and private did not exist in the old regime. There was beginning to be some kind of proto understanding of that before the revolution, mostly among lawyers who dealt with this stuff and with legal scholars. But there was no framework anywhere in the world, really, for property as we think of it. And certainly not any idea of well, I guess maybe a little bit there was starting to be in America, but the idea of a public trust, where there's, certain duties that one might have kind of to one's entire community rather than being, for instance, in the old regime, the meat inspectors, that was something that you purchased. You bought the job of meat inspector. And what you did with that was kind of considered, hey, you paid to be the meat inspector, you do what you please with it. If that means taking bribes from people or kickbacks or whatever, hey, he bought it. The very idea of, no, well, you're the meat inspector, your job is to ensure the health of people and make sure that the people producing meat are doing so safely and healthfully. The revolution creates these distinctions. But it is worth saying, it doesn't create them out of thin air. People had these thoughts under the old regimes. And as Bhaskar pointed out, that, there was, we are seeing the development of capitalism under the old regimes and the slow dissolution of some of these feudal rights and obligations that had previously governed society. But to me, that is a huge open question as to how, or even if, that would have eventually totally dissolved all of those bonds and replaced them with something like what we saw in Europe in, say, 1816, right after the fall of Napoleon. There's certainly no way that process would have taken 20 years.
So I'm going to ask a very
mind-bending progress.
I'm going to ask a stupid question because I really don't know the answer to it. And I feel like one should never ask questions like this live when recording. But how much of the French Revolution's influence on changing countries outside of France, like spurring changes within the English civil service and things like that, had to do with the influence of the revolution directly, or just the fact that this new revolutionary state was able to mobilize for total war in a way that other states weren't? And was it the military projection of the revolution's strength all the way through from the revolutionary period through Napoleon? Was that like the thing that really shaping states out that France wasn't directly kind of either administrating or had conquered instead of a puppet government or whatever else?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You see this process all over every country that opposed Napoleon. By 1805 is kind of the hinge year where Napoleon has just been crowned emperor. It's been a year to the day since he was crowned emperor. And, the kind of consensus in Europe is that he's gone too far and he's out of control. Everyone finally recognizes this now, that his ambition has grown far beyond what any one man can grasp. And all the great powers of Europe band together, and Napoleon just annihilates them. 1805, 1806, he just sweeps aside these armies even more dramatically than the revolutionary armies had been able to. So, you know, people are thinking of the revolution as a spent force. Napoleon makes it clear that at least the elements of the revolution that make the government strong are still very, very much developing. And all these countries are forced to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we cannot beat these people in the field, or at least, you know, not without relying on a lot of luck. We need to start looking at their system and finding what works for them and implementing it. And so you literally get countries that are straight up lifting things from the French style administration. They're even, you know, this is also the era when conservative politics really start to develop, which hadn't really been a thing before this, because under the old regimes, there's no conservatism because everyone just obeys. There's no ideology around obeying, really, other than this kind of divine right of kings, kind of this ultra reactionary stuff. But these countries, to mobilize their people, start to develop this kind of populism that's like the French populism, and that it's patriotic, and it's, you know, on a certain level, it's even rational. You know, it's not just saying you must obey; it's trying to reason with people. But it's relying on these very traditional, you know, love of kind of rural homeland, and love of religion, and love of the king, who is really like your father when you think about it.
Right.
You know, this type of stuff is the roots of conservative politics that I think you can even see today. So they're copying the French in all kinds of ways after starting roughly like 1807-ish. And that's everything from French-style military tactics and organization, all the way up to these very abstract things like, you know, how do we come up with a right-wing Prussian Jacobinism to make guys, you know, line up at the recruiting stations.
Well, that point about the recruiting stations is what I was going to ask about, because I mean, something I got, you know, certainly from listening to Age of Napoleon and also Mike Duncan's podcast. I probably shouldn't admit how much of my knowledge of this stuff is derived from podcasts, but is that like one of like the really remarkable changes brought about by the French Revolution, and why they were able to have this total mobilization Bhaskar was talking about, is that, like, in a way, I mean, it kind of seems like the French revolutionaries invented the idea of like patriotic military service, you know, as opposed to just like this is a job, or maybe this is something you were forced to do, you know, like kind of dragooned into doing, and the idea that, like, rather than just like, yeah, here are these people who are working for you, and you can very slowly move them around because you're paranoid all the time that they're going to desert. This is something that people would enthusiastically volunteer to do in order to defend the nation, and that like everybody would be taking pride in what the army was doing.
Yeah, this was basically a new thing in the 1790s. The government, there's a foreign army on the march to Paris. The last fortress between Paris and the army falls. There's panic in the capital. The government doesn't know what to do, and someone in the government says, I know what to do. I have an idea. He's this military theorist named Lazare Carnot, a very underrated figure in the history of the revolution, I think. And he has been reading these Enlightenment pamphlets about citizen soldiers, and a guy named Guibert made an argument that if you had a government that really took care of its people, that they believed in, that they would fight like the old Roman legions, you know, out of obligation and duty, not out of, you know, not because they were forced to. So Carnot says, you know, our armies cannot stand up to this invading force. We're in trouble here. Unless we turn things around right now, it's over. So he convinces people to go with this very radical notion of a people's army. And the government releases these two very revolutionary documents, the Declaration of the Fatherland in Danger and the Levée en Masse, which essentially, the Declaration of the Fatherland in Danger essentially says, hey, we're in trouble here and we need your help, it's addressed to the people of France, to beat back the enemy and protect all these new reforms. Then the Levée en Masse is, of course, the first ever mass conscription bill in history. They don't actually carry out mass conscription because they couldn't. But in theory, it does recruit all young men into the army. And it allows them to build up these gigantic armies that not only are massive in number, but where the men are very motivated, they can move very quickly because they don't have to worry about desertions, as you said. And it's really this tool of these people's armies that not only saves the revolution but exports the revolution all over Europe, and then of course becomes once Napoleon takes office, becomes his tool.
Yeah. So before, I do want to talk a little bit about Haiti, but before that, got a okay. So Art says no, he had an ear to. Was that somebody else?
Yes, that's the same guy. He was a complete genius. He was also a mathematician. Very remarkable figure, and actually his descendants went on to do other. They were scientists and politicians too. So he was a remarkable person and apparently had good genes.
Fair enough. And there was also a question about opinion of some of the main kind of players in the revolution. I lost the chat from earlier, but they mentioned Robespierre and Marat and Danton. Any thoughts about any of those guys? I know that's a good
I'm
question.
probably one of the only people who feels ambivalent about these people. They're very polarizing. People either love them or hate them. But to me, I mean, in some ways, they failed miserably. Most of these guys got executed by each other. They did not carry out a lot of the program that they went into office hoping to carry out. And in some ways, there's just a lot of, honestly, farce with that radical phase of the French Revolution. But I think if you look at it, as a historian, try to look at it neutrally in its proper context, you see the situation these people were thrust into, and it's remarkable that they were able to do anything at all. The country was in complete chaos. There was no template for what they were doing. We kind of have this idea in our heads. In 1848, they talked a lot about this, that they already knew what a revolution was because they'd seen the French Revolution. And so it's, this powerful thing in their historical memory that when people start, getting into the streets, the government's under pressure, people kind of understand what's happening and what each kind of class and political camps, role is in that situation. But in France, they were the ones writing the rule book for this stuff. So they had no idea what they were doing. And, they're beset by two different internal insurgencies. There's enemy armies coming towards Paris, some of which got, within a few weeks march of the city. And these guys are amateurs. They're like, lawyers and businessmen. And Danton was like a paralegal. Robespierre was a crusading rural poor person's rights lawyer out in the provinces only a few years before he came to power. So you look at who these guys were and what the task before them was. And in the context, it's kind of amazing that they were able to do what they did do, even though I think in the final analysis, you have to admit that they made so many mistakes and, so many failures along the way. It's a remarkable situation. And I don't think most people would do much better. There is a lot admirable about these people too. I don't want to discount that, but in some ways they look like clowns some of the time. And that's just kind of how history is.
Yeah, I stopped reading history in such a way where it's about taking sides, at least, especially as far back as then, right? And I think that it's often a good entry point for thought experiments and hypotheticals, especially as it relates to more modern politics. Like when let's say in the Russian Revolution, the debates in the 1920s over agricultural policy, over the political course of the revolution and whatever else, there's discernible camps, there's a certain level of, even there in those conditions, like state control, where state, theoretical ideas can actually become policy. Obviously, in the end, under Stalin for worse, but possibly for better. But like Everett was saying, this is just a completely different period, and it's hard to say to what extent Robespierre was ever in control of anything other than a very even his even the very small ruling clique. To what extent he was able to pull all the strings. I think though we could take inspiration from figures that saw, I guess, that so much of their society had to be radically changed, and that it would take mass politics to change it. And I think that differentiated them from just about every single other, quote unquote, middle class, a group of insurrectionaries ever. Like, it's very common in a revolution to just want to tamp down the passions right away and figure out how to govern. But for some reason, they just pushed it further and further and heightened contradictions. And part of that was their own incompetence, I guess, and part of that was by design. But it was a very, novel period, and certainly Europe throughout the 18th and 19th century were just filled with the most horrendous crimes coming from state policy in Europe, and that continued. And obviously, the real crimes and the rampant executions and abuses of human rights and whatever else that happened during this period is going to get a lot of attention, but I think it obviously has to be contextualized. And of course, the same kind of Tory historians that have begrudging respect for Napoleon, who led countless tens of thousands to slaughter on the battlefields or through disease and whatever else, have no such sympathy for the Jacobins, who oversaw, I would guess, a far less substantial body count.
Yeah, I mean, I know one of the figures that always really strikes me is I think that in the Mike Duncan podcast season on the French Revolution, which I liked a great deal, but I mean, he goes into a lot of gory detail about the sort of terror oversawn by the Committee of Public Safety, and he sort of mentions for like a sentence that in Poland, when they were like busily massacring, local Jacobin sympathizers there, that was they killed more people there than in the entirety of the terror in France. It's like,
one of my favorite statistics. Yeah, the sack of Praga in Poland, not Prague, Praga. The Russians killed more people in one day than the Jacobins killed in Paris during the terror. Same with no one ever talks about what happened in Ireland in 1798, where there's a rebellion by there's a rebellion that's associated with the Catholic population by the powers that be, even though it's mostly led by Protestants. And during the suppression of that rebellion, basically the British authorities just let Protestant militias run wild in the country for like a year. And they're, lynching people, raping people. It was really horrific stuff. But, the exact same thing that's going on just across the ocean with the regard to the Vendée Rebellion against the French Republic, that is, just immortalized in art and stories and song. And it's interesting. I just got finished with the series on the Haitian Revolution, and my God, the stuff going on in the West Indies in this period just pales compared to any of the atrocities in Europe committed by anyone. It's really horrific stuff, and personal and kind of grotesque in a way that it's not in Europe. So it's always a tricky thing, because I don't want to downplay the fact that, the stuff, some of the things the revolutionary government did were horrible. They turned, Napoleon's stomach was turned by the terror. So, this is bad, bloody stuff, but it's not unusual for this era. This is an era when states are discovering the kind of power they have. They're improving their administrations, they're improving their armies, they're improving their law enforcement and kind of paramilitary forces. And they're just kind of coming to the understanding that, you can sign an order and thousands of people are just gone, and you don't have to think about it or worry about it ever again. And obviously we'll see, in the 20th century, just how far that can be taken. But this is the era when that's being, that they're coming into that awareness, states, powerful people, wealthy people, that kind of destruction and brutality is within their grasp, and within the grasp of kind of normal operations. You don't have to be a butcher to do this stuff. You just, you can be a clerk and sign a paper, and it's just done by other people. And that's not something that previous governments in previous eras of history really could do.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Haiti, and because this is also something we should talk about, just a little bit before we wrap up, because both because, as has been mentioned, I mean this is this is part of what's being referred to in Jacobin Magazine's use of the word Jacobin, C.L.R. James's book on the Haitian Revolution. And also because I mean this really does seem like one of the most sort of significant flowerings of the French Revolution and of the sort of a different version of the argument was kind of running through earlier with Bhaskar about how these proclaimed ideals of the French Revolution, that of universal human equality and freedom and solidarity, are things that I mean, like in that case, clearly, I mean, were taken up by the people who were proclaiming that didn't necessarily have in mind, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to listen or they're not going to take it seriously.
Yeah, to me, this is the great significance. I mean, other than the profound impact in Haiti itself, this is kind of one of the most significant things about the Haitian Revolution to the world is that this was one of the great tests of the French Revolution. Is it a universal revolution as proclaimed by the revolutionaries themselves, or is it just another, the English Civil War, the parliamentary faction had their own ideology that they claimed was universal, but was really based in English Puritanism. And that's been true of many rebellions of the past, where they developed these kind of ersatz ideologies to justify what they were doing. And so that was one of the big questions of the French Revolution is this just another, like the English Civil War, where some guys overthrew the government and they need to come up with, you got to sleep at night, so why did we do it? Or do they mean it? Are they actually speaking to something universal in the human condition? And I mean, it's a mixed record because there are some places where the French completely went back on their ideals, especially in Haiti. But the significance of Haiti is that those ideas got turned against the French government by the Haitians and proved just as powerful, if not more so, wielded by the rebels who were fighting against Republican France. So to me, I mean, that is a very powerful test. Is it universal? Well, it works just as well against its originators. So it seems like that there is something there.
But in the same way that the French Revolution itself encountered the contradictions of certain bourgeois elements that just wanted to restore stability and wanted to more tightly control mass action, that related to their reaction to what was going on in Haiti. So you have the most radical elements of the French Revolution who were able to say, yes, slavery should be abolished. Whereas by the time the maritime bourgeoisie might have been imbued with a lot of the same Enlightenment idea, but they also had this vested, material interest in maintaining the system itself. So I think where Marxists would traditionally think about the French Revolution and think about, what they called bourgeois revolutions, they would lay out this contradiction between the universal Enlightenment ideology and the material interest. And obviously, at the end of the day, the material interest would always win out. But that was another unique thing about some of the most radical Jacobins of the French Revolution, is that they didn't have quite the same material contradictions. They had it to some degree, but not as much as these big, powerful interests that took the power of country after.
And it's a great preview of the contradictions of liberalism that would emerge in the next half century. And ultimately, I think it's a great preview of the split between the socialist left and the non-socialist left, whatever that might be. Because, the original revolutionaries were, free market economics and capitalism were core parts of the revolution, just as much as giving bread to the people was. And so that's, that is a contradiction there. How much are we, how seriously are we taking these Enlightenment principles versus how seriously are we taking our commitment to markets? And I think this was the first time in history you really see a truly liberal bourgeois government having to make those choices. And that's obviously something that we'll see play out. I mean, even up until today, that's still a dynamic we see play out.
Yeah, and I mean, because of that, the mass politics element that Bhaskar mentioned earlier, I mean, you have people who are, sure, I mean, like, Enlightenment liberal, bourgeois revolutionaries whose like ideological commitment would really be to free markets, but like you have to have, you have to have like price controls, on what you can sell bread for and stuff like that, because because the sans culottes who put you in power in the first place are going to kill you if you don't. So, all right. Strom, thank you for the super chat. Says the radical liberal myth of the citizen at least posits that they're superhuman personalities, like that. Suspect anyone who indiscriminately craps of the English, American, French revolutions of being ironically neo-radlib. I'm not sure what that means, but you should certainly, I think honor the legacy of all of these revolutions. I like, other stuff was going on this year, so I didn't. But I usually post something on 4th of July about how you shouldn't be a weirdo about it. Like take the take the lefty interpretation of the history instead of just discounting it as the beginning.
Off from wage labor for most people, right? So that means that today it's objectively historically progressive, even though we could debate it after. But yeah, I think we definitely lean on the Harvey K side of things, right, Ben? in the American Revolution debate.
Sure. Yeah, right. The thing, the Michael Harrington line, right? You got to see the seed beneath the snow. Or else what's the point? Yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
But like, I think we are right to see like the French Revolution is obviously that period is characterized by tons of military conflict, but I think posterity remembers it as mass action, whereas the American Revolution does have mass action, but we remember it as primarily a military conflict with like an undercurrent of like basically civil war, because of the amount of loyalists in the country or whatever. And I think that interpretation is basically right in terms of why the French Revolution, I think, has captured the imagination of an entire world, whereas the American Revolution,
Sorry, you're breaking up.
But didn't have the same impact. It was always like more parochial, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like in some ways it feels like the American Revolution was like stuck in the like the first phase of the French Revolution, maybe like the sort of level of revolution going on is relatively shallow, right? In terms of overturning established power structures, maybe partly because the English crown was so far away, and so there was less that had to be overturned to sort of accomplish some basic bourgeois democratic things. But I mean, there's also a sense like I'm sure this is like I'm sure this would like make a historian with a nuanced view cringe in many ways, but I mean, like, I sort of also think about it as like, in a way, like one important difference between the American and French revolutions is that like, we waited to have our war with our Vendée until the 1860s.
There's something to that. Well, and furthermore, just on the basic level, the people of Philadelphia never stormed into the Continental Congress and kicked out all the conservatives and declared a new state. It never happened. That did happen in France. So you don't get, in the French Revolution, there are these phases, and in the American Revolution, it's the colonial assemblies and the Continental Congress straight through. So just on a basic level, there's not these internal conflicts, which I think is what really were the engine pushing the French Revolution in this more radical direction.
Yeah, in Philly, there's only revolution when the Eagles win.
Fair enough. Before we go, going to bring on our graphic designer, J. Andrew World, for just a second. Wish him happy birthday. His birthday is Bastille Day. How good is that?
Nice. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. I know the French really know how to celebrate my birthday, military parades, fireworks. I wish everybody's birthday could be celebrated like how the French celebrate mine. It's so great to be a French institution. Thank everybody so much for being here. So,
yeah. And you're going to be elsewhere on YouTube tonight, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a special birthday stream with one of my oldest friends in the world, Gabriel Horn. He's a actor, director, writer out of Hollywood. He's got some cool new projects he's going to be telling us about, and we're going to be talking about the movie Tapeheads.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll put a link to that in the description here. Thank you, Bhaskar and Everett. I guess we should plug the Jacobin subscription thing again before. So $7.89, and then I think for international actually $17.89, right?
Yeah, we got to turn that off soon. It's late for them, so I think it'll keep working for another like 3 or 4 hours, but maybe we'll keep it on to the end of the week. But yeah, if you like Jacobin, if you like the work of such authors as Ben Burgess, you should subscribe to it in print. You know, we've been we're doing more of the audio video stuff, I think, but Ben and I are working on a book together, and you know, we have to print Jacobin Magazine, so we are what do you call it? Like Lee, we're like disrupting, you know, multimedia platform, you know, citizens revolt or whatever.
Yeah. I was actually just thinking a few minutes ago about how it's kind of funny. We're talking about the French Revolution, and I don't remember exactly how many articles ago, but not that many articles ago, the thing I wrote for Jacobin was about the abolishing the death penalty, which I guess, to be fair, was Robespierre's position, I think, up until about 6 months before the terror started. So, you know, things move fast.
Yeah, and you know, we wanted to wither away the state up until, you know, September 1917.
Yeah, fair enough. Real quick before we go, El Macho Shrigma, thank you for the super chats. Would it be valuable for the left? Speak out about personal responsibility, personal goals, dreams, callings, with the same seriousness we do social responsibility, social change, democracy at the workplace. I mean, that's a huge question, and I'm not, I think, probably going to be able to do it very much justice in the last minute of the stream. But, I mean, like, in a way, I mean, I think that, I mean, I guess I'd say two things about it and then see if anybody else wants to chime in. Like, I think that one is there probably is something that's bad about leaving all sort of personal responsibility advocacy to the right. I remember like talking about this with Michael Brooks years ago about how, you know, it's like kind of a shame that, you know, that we don't have the, you know, we don't have somebody to write books about how you should clean your room and, you know, keep your back straight, you know, who's a leftist. But then, you know, on the, you know, clean your room and organize a union. But on the like personal goals, dreams, callings thing, I mean, I guess I'm a little bit more sure what to say about, you know, that part. Cause I mean, to my mind, I mean, that's the point of any kind of emancipatory politics, right? I mean, we, you know, want a society where people, you know, don't have to work all the time, where they're less, you know, they're less worried about, you know, quitting their job, you know, like even like basic social democratic things, like you're not worried that if you quit your job, you know, you won't have health insurance, so you can, you know, do whatever the hell you want with your life. I mean, if that's not the point, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we want to combine the two things, not really separate them. Though I do think. Remember that Home Depot slogan from like 3-4 years ago? They ran it for like almost a decade in their ads, like, you could do it, we can help. I think that's a good, you know, approach to people. Like, yeah, sure, you could improve your life, but there's certain things the state can do. There's certain things that collective action can do that will actually empower you as an individual agent. And you participating in this collective struggle will also empower the collective. You know, that's the unity of those two things are there. yeah, I think personal goals, dreams, and callings definitely fits within that. Obviously, the word personal responsibility, I think we would have to reframe from kind of a hectoring about personal responsibility to like some sort of collective responsibility to take part in struggle. Like if you're a member of a union at a workplace that's going on strike, kind of that sense of responsibility and duty and commitment to like some sort of radical civil society or to a workplace struggle or to a political party, I think is obviously there. But yeah, between the two, the weight should be on the social responsibility, but we shouldn't cut out the personal end of it too.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta, I don't know, you do the levee en masse, and you have to go to the, the front, do your part to defend fatherland, so there's something there.
I was about to say, that's the revolutionaries talked about that. There was a revolutionary who was killed at age 12, and there was a verse about him. It said that, that people were sad for him, but he lived more than a slave of a monarch. That, a coward has never known life the way that a free Republican has. And I think that would maybe not be so bad to get back to that.
Yeah. Maybe like a 22-year-old or something. 12.
Yeah, 12 is too young.
Anyway, before we should probably end the stream before we like call for a youth. I think they call it a children's Melissa, child soldiers. Yeah.
We're not gonna start advocating child soldiers. That would be quite a jump, right? Like if it's like last year, like the Jacobin DSA kind of party line was all about like electing Bernie Sanders president, and like the strategy for social change had drifted so far that it was like, okay, so we're gonna have to round up some child soldiers.
I hate to say this, guys. Like before I came on, I was training my children how to be child soldiers. Because they're teenagers now and they got to learn how to fight. But I guess maybe I should have stopped.
Yeah. All right. So while we're still, while we're still doing the good, Kotsky, middle road that falls short of the Coney Lord's Resistance Army model of organization, we will end the stream. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Happy Bastille Day.
Happy Bastille Day. Thanks for having us.
Vive la France.